Greetings and welcome to the Richard Dolan Show, where every week we fight the good fight, at least every week that I'm here. If you don't follow the UFO subject, you may still find what I have to say to be quite relevant indeed, because this affects really all of us, not just those who care about the UFO phenomenon. So I was going to give this a couple of different titles to the YouTube title page. I ended up giving it kind of a long-winded UFOs, the Gillibrand Amendment, and the Globalist Revolution. You'll see why as I go into this whole thing, but I want to jump right into it. I've got a bunch of slides here that I will share with you. So I want you to introduce you to ASRO. This is the Anomalous Surveillance and Resolution Office, or ASRO, I guess that would be the acronym. This is, when we talk about the Gillibrand Amendment, we're talking about, this is what it was. So in the beginning of November of this year, just less than 2 months ago, this amendment to the National Defense Authorization Act was introduced. Here, I'll give myself a little bit of a screen there. And this is by New York Democrat Senator Kirsten Gillibrand, certainly in conjunction with Senator Marco Rubio. There's been a lot of speculation quite openly whether Christopher Mellon had any hand in this. I suspect that those suspicions would be accurate. I don't have inside confirmation, but this does seem like something that he would be well positioned to do, and right along his interests here. But this is an amendment that goes into the annual Pentagon budget, and it was just signed by President Biden, I think 2 days ago, so it is now law. This is actually, and it's gone through the process. So really what this authorizes is the creation of, as I said, an Anomalous Surveillance Resolution Office. Interesting title. They're getting the word anomaly or anomalous right in there. They're very upfront about this, and this is from everything that it looks like on paper, and we have to emphasize on paper, this looks like it's designed to be a robust UFO or UAP investigation office, now authorized by Congress, run in the Pentagon. And this is supposed to be like the real deal. So they are said that they will be mandated to conduct serious investigations of UFOs throughout the United States, not just over certain restricted military areas, but apparently the whole thing, doing actual investigations. And they are expected to come up with answers, like actual, what is this sort of a thing, and what are the theories, and I mean, it's really kind of an amazing thing. And the other thing I didn't mention in that slide is that they are going to be mandated to report to Congress, at least in an unclassified, their unclassified conclusions. So this is actually quite a lot more significant than what the UAP task force, which was run by the Navy last year. We all remember that. This really has much more of a sweeping mandate here to actually do some genuine investigations. That's the idea of this ASRO, or the Anomalous Surveillance and Resolution Office. So it got introduced as an amendment to the Pentagon budget, essentially in the beginning of November. And, no one really knew what was going to happen with this. Is this for real? What are they trying to do here? And then would it get whittled away during congressional negotiations? Turns out it didn't seem to get touched at all. So it is what it is. Now, 3 weeks after that got introduced, the Pentagon made this announcement here, the establishment of their own successor, basically, to the Navy's UAP task force. Now, we kind of knew this was going to be coming as well. I just think it's very interesting that the Navy would do this in the immediate aftermath of the introduction of the Gillibrand Amendment. So the Navy, not the Navy, the Pentagon announces that the UAP task force is now this new organization, which they call, brace yourself, the Airborne Object Identification and Management Synchronization Group. That should almost be considered a health risk even to say that, like classic Pentagon, mind-numbing Pentagon, bureaucratic speak. The acronym AOI MSG, none of this makes any sense. Like, how can you figure out even what this thing is by the title? And in fact, it's really designed, I think, to be as vague as possible. I mean, like, what a name. And in fact, when they discussed this, I should say, they definitely were downplaying anything having to do with UFOs or UAP or anything anomalous. This organization, the AOI MSG, is really covering just a limited range, essentially sensitive military areas, not anything else. There's no mandate in what they were announcing to analyze or conclude or report to Congress or the public or anything like that. This is an incredibly, I mean, as bad as the old Project Blue Book was back in the olden times, this would promise to be even much worse than that. So it's a really interesting thing. You've got the Gillibrand Amendment sponsoring this creation of this office that, again, I want to emphasize, on paper looks to be halfway decent, at least potentially. But the Pentagon then puts this thing out there, which is not even a shadow of what the ASRO organization would be if that goes through. So what's the deal with that? I've been wondering about this. I actually, on my website over at Richard Dolan Members, I've done a little bit of questioning on this as well. But essentially, it looks to me that we have the potential and perhaps the reality of two separate UFO agencies, publicly known UFO agencies sponsored by the United States government. And it's not like this is a first. You know, there have been multiple UFO groups in the past, but they were classified. You know, back in the 1950s and 60s, there were, definite classified UFO investigations. The public just didn't know about it. But here we've got the announcement of two specific offices, each charged in its own way to study the UFO or UAP phenomenon. One in a much more robust way, one in a very, very tepid, secretive way, I think would be a fair way to put it as well. So the question that, we can ask is, what is the deal here? What is actually happening? I've always believed that the type of group sponsored by the Gillibrand Amendment would not be welcome to the old guard, secrecy UFO old guard from the Pentagon, or their overlords, basically. Let's talk about the Bilderberg Group or the folks at Davos, or the masters of our universe, as I will often call them, the people behind all of that. But certainly there's a secrecy group that has been within the Pentagon ever since, really, UFO information came out 4 years ago. And I remember all this, in the New York Times. It's been 4 years now since the New York Times did their pieces on UFOs. And there's Tucker Carlson with David Fravor and all that information coming out. But, what's happened is that, of course, there's been a tremendous amount of resistance within the Pentagon bureaucratic structure to the rollout of UFO information. We have seen this time and again. And we've also seen that there have been factions within that group that have occasionally been successful in promoting some genuine UFO information getting out there. All right. So my thought, and this is only a speculation, so don't hold me to this, would be, though, that the Gillibrand Amendment sponsoring ASRO is not a welcome development to that group within the Pentagon. And so I am speculating that the AOI MSG group is certainly the Pentagon's preferred UFO organization, which really gives the public nothing whatsoever. And in fact, I did have a little bit of a behind the scenes conversation with one of the people who knows a lot about the Gillibrand Amendment. I guess I'll leave it at that. And what I can definitely say is some of these people do not want their names out there in connection to it, not because there's anything nefarious. They just don't want their names dragged into all of this. But my understanding is that these people behind this amendment genuinely believe, this is what they believe, that they want a powerful UFO group to go against the Pentagon. And at least a few of them see it this way. Now, whether it's going to turn out that way or not, that's a whole interesting issue. So what I guess I'm suggesting here is 2022 could really be an interesting year, if nothing else, in terms of a potential bureaucratic struggle between these two competing UFO organizations. And you could just imagine, like, if you are pulling the strings and you're high up in the Pentagon and you really do not like this this new organization that's supposed to do decent UFO investigations, you might want to sabotage it in any way that you can. And one thing that you could do is you make sure one of your guys is in charge of that organization. I don't know who's going to be in charge of that organization. I don't think that they've even gotten that far. But you would want one of your people essentially to undermine it in as subtle a way as possible. I mean, clearly there is enough political support for this that they couldn't kill it while it was being discussed. So they had to let the thing be born, essentially. But that doesn't mean this is the end of the struggle. And you can definitely imagine, I'm sure it's not that difficult to see, that folks in the Pentagon who are not happy about this would do everything they can to sabotage it. And then you wait a year or two, and people are like saying, well, this organization is not accomplishing much of anything, put out a really garbage report. What are we paying for? And you roll it into the AOI MSG and say, yep, we'll take it from here. Can that happen? I'm thinking, hell yes, that can happen. Absolutely. Will that happen? I don't know. But it's definitely something to keep in mind. So I think that's something that we want to look at, is this potential interest. You know, I think that these two organizations could be the sign that we're looking at really two different factions within the national security structure that each have their own take on how to promote the UFO subject to the public. And I think that is potentially what we're going to be seeing. Now, I showed you this slide just a moment ago. Ask yourself a question. 4 years ago, when the New York Times really shocked all of us, let's just be honest here, with two halfway decent UFO articles in December of 2017. Look, I remember it. You remember this. And we're all thinking, what the hell is the New York Times doing with like decent UFO reporting for the first time ever? And so people wondered, is this disclosure? Is this disclosure? And I got asked that question. I wondered it. And the thing that I couldn't wrap my brain around is, how did this end up in the New York Times? I've since come to believe these articles got into the New York Times because you had Leslie Kean and Ralph Blumenthal in particular, who really genuinely wanted this in there. And I think they fought to get these articles in there. So good for them and good for us. But what has happened since then? How much information really has come out? As I say in here, spoiler alert, not very much has changed. A little bit. The Navy has made a few statements about the reality of these UAP, their ongoing encounters. Yes, the fact that they have procedures for engaging these UFOs or UAP, all of that has come out since then. That's important. That's important. All right. You know the old expression, don't look a gift horse in the mouth. That's from like the 19th century when people would ride horses. And the idea being, someone gives you a horse, that's kind of a big deal. Don't go nitpicking and looking at the mouth and saying, is this a good horse? Hey, you just got a free horse. Well, we got a lot of UFO information in the last 4 years that we were not getting public acknowledgments of for years and years before that. So we got, let's be happy. Let's take the win. Okay. But having said that, there's a lot that we have not gotten out. And let's talk a little bit about that. What is being left out of the conversation? Well, here's a couple of the things of what is missing. The fact that there's a conspiracy, that there's a cover-up to this phenomenon doesn't ever really get discussed in our mainstream or even semi-mainstream conversations here. It's like no one wants to talk. Why is there no discussion of this? Look, everyone realizes if we acknowledge the reality of UFOs, how difficult is it for us to recognize that we have probably, I'm putting that in air quotes, been lied to for 75 to 80 years about this, and that would indicate a cover-up and a conspiracy. And yet this is not ever discussed. And then moreover, what's not being discussed is the nature of that conspiracy. In other words, I'm going to get into a little more of this in a short while, but the fact that a lot of this, I think, is privatized and proprietary as opposed to even classified. The fact that it's what I always call legal illegality, buried within the bureaucracy of the Pentagon and the Department of Energy and the CIA. And the fact that getting to this is, might take an act of God or even more, like to get to the real bottom of this. And that's not being discussed. The fact that no one's talking about or barely talking about the likelihood of crash retrievals or possession of exotic materials or bodies. Now, I say almost. I want to give Leslie and Ralph some credit here in the New York Times. Their article from July of 2020, about a year and a half ago, they did actually come very close to stating that as a fact. They did an interview with Dr. Eric Davis. Many of you, I'm sure, recall this article. And they came pretty close. And then you had the statement by Lou Elizondo with Tucker Carlson in at the end of May of 2019, in which he also just basically out and said, yes, our government has possession of these craft. Now, I thought that was kind of a shocking thing, but there's been really no follow-up on that bombshell of a statement. So, yes, I have to say, what's missing from the conversation, any genuine discussion, any meaningful discussion of crash retrievals of UFOs or, God forbid, alien bodies, that's not being discussed. Similarly, there's no discussion of abductions or encounters, let us say, with these beings. By the way, this sketch here is I've always considered one of the best sketches of aliens from about 40 years ago, early 1980s, by a lady named Gail McBride. And I just wanted to display that here. But there's no conversation about abductions. And, here's the thing. The UFO subject has got one heck of a learning curve. All right. So if you're a skeptic, an intelligent skeptic, but you're kind of ignorant about the subject, it's very likely that you are underestimating this entire subject. That happens all the time. The UFO subject's got a steeper learning curve than most people realize. And one of the things is abductions. So it's very common to have skeptics dismiss abductions altogether. They think, oh, well, people have this idea that these things happen, but they're dealing with some kind of fantasy or confabulation. And in fact, if you saw any of the J.J. Abrams 4-part special on called UFO from earlier this year, the first part's available on the Showtime YouTube channel, and then you got to pay for the other 3. But what you find is that I think that special is really a harbinger of what we're going to be told to believe about UFOs. So that, in other words, there is a UFO reality. You're not crazy for seeing UFOs, and there has been a cover-up, but what you're seeing is almost certainly military technology, and there are no abductions. And that's really what came out of that 4-parter. And I think it's very common for skeptics to just dismiss the whole abduction phenomenon. But I want to say something about that. There are a surprisingly large number of detailed, and in my view, when you look into those details, highly credible accounts of people who've had close encounters with alien beings and abduction experiences. And the commonalities among all of these disparate people is really quite remarkable. So this is not being discussed. And it's a logical thing that you would expect to see discussed when we talk about the potential reality of UFO phenomenon, and yet it doesn't get talked about in the public conversation almost at all. And there's also a couple of other things missing from the public conversation on UAP or UFOs. Another is there's no sense of the vast quantity of the sightings that happen every single day and every week. All right. I wonder if I'm the only UFO researcher who really regularly talks about just how widespread, how incredibly common these sightings are around the world every day. There's the National UFO Reporting Center, which I talk about constantly. And there's also the MUFON database, the MUFON CMS is what it's called. And between the two of them every year, there's more than 10,000 unique UFO sightings in North America every year. Now, I'm not saying, and no one is saying, that means that there are 10,000 genuine UFOs being seen every year. But look, let's have some, let's be reasonable here. There's a lot of good sightings, and no one really knows what is the percentage of like truly genuine UFO sightings. Like, I don't know, and you don't know. You got people who say it's as much as 25 or 30%, even to this day. And you got people who are like, oh my God, it's less than 1%. It's a huge range there. Now, when I look over the cases, I would say 5% is a minimum of legit numbers of cases, but let's just say 5%. All right. So you get 10,000 reports in North America alone. 5% of that is 500. If you take the top 5%, you got 500 decent. If you take 1%, that's 100 per year. And there's no question that the top 100 of those databases are extraordinary cases. All right. So what I'm saying to you here is that these sightings are basically daily around the world. All right. There's a lot of them. And they are doing things that are covert, that are like, we want to know what's happening with these sightings. What are these beings doing? All right. And beyond that, what's not being discussed is there's no hint of what I would call the reality behind this phenomenon. In other words, yeah, let me unshare the screen again here. In other words, there's something big and real going on here with UFOs. All right. It is widespread. It involves beings that are clearly operating on another level than what we are operating on. They have the ability to manipulate us cognitively. They have the ability to control your body and basically freeze you when they want to freeze you. They have the ability to levitate you. They have the ability to play games with your memory, to wipe your memory. They have the ability to do things with space and time that we don't really have a full understanding of. And they're here. They're interacting with us in a significant way. All of that is true. And there's even more truth to that. There's the fact that there almost certainly are elements in our society, all right, that are well aware of this, and they're keeping this secret, and they've got very likely a significant infrastructure behind them to manage this secret. And it's been going on for an entire human lifetime. Like, all of this is a significant reality. And then finally, we have to ask ourselves, what are these other beings even doing? What are they doing with the abductions? What are they doing with the monitoring of countless people? If this were a fully human operation, which sometimes people bring up every now and then, you've got to ask yourself, what would that thing cost? All right. Over at my website, one of the members made this as a comment not long ago, and I thought it was a very perceptive comment, just essentially saying, like, essentially calculating out what it would cost. And by his calculation, we're talking trillions of dollars to have all the ARVs, the alien reproduction vehicles. It can't be cheap. Around the world, abducting people, doing this, doing that. Like, it is a global operation. And whether it would cost trillions or not, it would be a huge, expensive operation. And is it really something that we've been doing, or are there other beings? So this is just a part of the reality behind the phenomenon. And then, aside from the fact that these beings are here or happen by coincidence to be here, just as the human race is going through its most significant revolution, maybe since we discovered fire. Like, right now, we're in it. We're moving into a transhumanist, big societal anthill, essentially, is what we're doing. And they're here for that. So there's a lot that is being left out of the UFO conversation, I suppose, is what I'm trying to say here. So what is coming for us in the coming year? I was kind of alluding to this. Is there going to be Pentagon infighting over with the one UFO group and the other UFO group? That will be interesting to see if it happens. Are we going to get a new UAP report that's basically the same nothing burger that the last one was? Or are we going to get something that, makes us go, wow, they're actually telling us something very interesting? Are we going to see more new books or documentaries that come out? Undoubtedly, there will be more documentaries and maybe new books. And maybe there'll be a new report. Is it really going to change our world? Or is it just going to be the same old, same old? I have a feeling it's going to be that. I don't expect, that we're going to be seeing a revolutionary breakthrough in the UFO conversation. And that is even in a best case scenario, if this the Gillibrand Amendment resulting in ASRO actually becomes a genuinely powerful investigative organization. Even if it does, I'm not expecting it. Why am I not expecting it? Maybe this is one reason. We're in the midst of the great global reset. It is a global, or let us say globalist revolution. And, people really need to understand this is a genuine revolution. This man you're looking at here is the contemporary incarnation of the devil. His name is Klaus Schwab. He runs the World Economic Forum. This is one of Klaus Schwab's statements. And just listen to this carefully, what he's trying to say here. The pandemic represents a rare but narrow window of opportunity. Who the hell is still using that phrase? Window of opportunity to reflect, reimagine, and reset our world. All right. So first of all, anytime you hear anyone say reimagine and anything, your job is to punch them right in the face, because that should never, ever be like anytime you hear someone saying reimagine, let's reimagine this, let's reimagine that. It's coming right out of Davos. It's coming right out of people like Klaus Schwab. None of the language that we're getting in our contemporary politics on the national level is actually indigenous to the nation. None of it. All of it comes from the World Economic Forum in Davos. People got to understand this. Even something like Build Back Better, that's not simply in America. Justin Trudeau in Canada used the phrase Build Back Better. You got European bureaucrats using the phrase Build Back Better. Why? Why are these global politicians all using the same language? Well, they get their marching orders from the same place. That's why. They get it from the World Economic Forum and the Bilderberg people and people like Klaus Schwab, who is a genuine visionary. He's a dark, evil visionary, but he is a visionary that is seeking to transform this world. And he's putting it right out there for you in this statement. The Great Reset. We're going to reset the world. We're going to reimagine the world. We're going to change everything. And they are doing it. They are doing it radically. How are they doing it? Well, what is the globalist revolution? I got this image here from a website. This is global management, global governance project.org. And look at the nice finger pushing a button on the planet. They're doing the globalist reset. This is not an ironic image. These people, this website, they're into this. And that's the thing. They talk about global governance. 30 years ago when George Bush Sr. talked about it, he didn't use that phrase. He used a phrase that people came to dislike, the New World Order. Bush puts that out there. People are like, no, we don't want the New World Order. Get it away. And so the masters of our little world are like, okay, how about global governance? And people are like, yay, global governance. Give us more of that. And so now you're hearing about global governance. And they think it's like a really neat thing. It's wonderful. But what is global governance doing to us, not for us, to us worldwide? Well, they're revolutionizing everything is what they're doing. They are revolutionizing our legal system. They are because they're changing the laws. All around us, particularly with the COVID as the perfect pretext for them. They're transforming our economic systems. That's obvious. They're transforming our political systems, our technology, our media. We don't have media anymore. We have media that is literally doing one thing only, and it is pushing you into this globalist system. That's all it's doing. We have a revolution of who has access to whose data. Boy, that's a big one. And what else is being transformed? Your society and your culture are being transformed. And ultimately, they're trying to transform you. This whole thing with society and culture, I just want to talk about this as well. I'm going to get back to UFOs in just a minute. The culture has to be transformed from their point of view. All right. Like, people really got to understand this. If you're one of those people who meet at Davos, all right, and you train all the world leaders, everyone from Justin Trudeau or Joe Biden or Angela Merkel, who just retired, or Emmanuel Macron, or all of these people all go through the Davos system. All of them have the same marching orders and talking points. All right. So from that point of view, they are all thinking, wow, 200 sovereign nations on this planet. Well, that's too many. Can't have that. So, because, then no one's going to agree and do what we tell them that we want them to do. We have to create a system that we control globally. And they have been working on this for a long time. The first Bilderberg meeting was in 1954, and they were working on it before that, frankly. So the point is, no nations. The point is dominance of transnational corporations. In fact, the whole World Economic Forum is itself paid for by the world's biggest corporations. They fund the World Economic Forum, which gives the essentially progressivist political marching orders to the global politicians around the world, all funded by the major corporations of the planet. All right. It all comes out of Davos. So they got to get rid of nations. They've got to create surveillance technology because they love that. And they have to change the media so that the media is only a cheerleading section for the revolution that they are creating. And for the most part, they've been succeeding. There are definite pushback points against them. And if you are a politician or a media or a private person that is pushing back, you become demonized. That's obvious. And they will go out of their way to do anything possible to destroy you and demonize you. But the culture has to be transformed. The culture's got to be changed, because if you're going to have people accept this new system, you've got to create a new cultural acceptance of it. Otherwise, they're not going to like it. They're not going to put up with it. When you're taking people's livelihoods away, you've got to find a way to make them accept it passively. So yeah, you give them video games and you give them meaningless entertainment, all of that, sure. But you've also got to beat them over the head with enough fear and intimidation that they know to obey, and to comply. And you have to transform the culture away from things like individualism and away even from traditional family systems. And you want to isolate people. You want to destroy the old culture so that people don't have a solid footing, so that you can then roll out the new culture. That is all that they're trying to do. And that is what we are seeing all around us. And it is not surprising that in such a war, in such a revolution, there are going to be a lot of opportunists who are like, hey, this is a power opportunity for me. And they jump into the culture wars. And it's, do they actually get genuine power by being part of a Twitter mob? No, probably not. They're probably just getting some psychological sense of domination, and that's enough for a lot of people. But there are definitely people who are piling on to this system. They see an opportunity. They can see there's a revolution happening, and they want to be on the winning side as they see it. So that's what's happening. That is the transformation, and this matters for the UFO phenomenon as well. When you're talking about in the 1950s, and UFO groups back then are saying, well, we need to open this UFO subject up. We have to get it to Congress and we got to talk about it. They're doing all of that in the context of what they assume was a free society. All right. That was their idea of disclosure. But how do you have disclosure when you're talking about a global totalitarian system coming into place? How does that work? All right. It's a very different sort of a situation. And that is what we are now looking at here. We're looking at the implementation of essentially a form of global fascism, a transnational, breathtakingly comprehensive system that is being pushed into place right before our eyes. Okay. So it's a controlled society that is being created, one of total surveillance and population control, total, what we might call a combined news / entertainment / propaganda system rolled into one. More and more we see this happening. It's totally destroyed the arts, destroyed music, it's destroyed most of our movies. They don't care. The whole thing is about controlling your mind and making you conform. All right. Disruptions are not allowed in this society. And this is why conspiracy theories are not allowed anymore. It wasn't always this way. People, we had once upon a time, we had Watergate in the early 1970s. What a tepid conspiracy compared with so many of the other real ones that have happened. But Watergate was a real thing that actually happened. And it was a big, 50 years ago now. And it polarized the country, and it wisened a lot of people up to the fact that, wow, the people in Washington are a little bit corrupt, aren't they? Gee, surprise. and that there are conspiracies. And it wasn't an unusual thing for people to have this very, skeptical view of their government. But look at how the culture has changed now. Now to have a skeptical attitude toward the government, at least toward this government, is akin to being treasonous. It's like, you can't do that, all right? Because we're not really increasingly being permitted openly to have such an attitude. Now, if the government is led by someone who is not fully on board with the globalist agenda, then yeah, all bets are off and you go after him and try to take him down. Whether it's Trump or any other global politician, because Trump wasn't the only one who didn't really play nice in the sandbox for the globalists. There were others, and they've all had to be taken out in one way or another. But the point is, when you have a compliant globalist leader in charge of your nation, you're not allowed to question it anymore. All right. And that's called conspiracy theories. And God forbid you believe such a thing. So in terms of UFO disclosure is way too disruptive, in my view, for it to be allowed. And I mean literally to be allowed to go full on. So this ASRO organization, this anomaly surveillance and resolution office, that is now law. All right. So it's in place, but we really have to ask ourselves, how far is this thing really going to be able to go? All right. And here's something else that's missing from the equation. I just want to talk about this a little bit. You all remember this, the Davis-Wilson notes. Now, this is something that was leaked out to the public in June of 2019. I was, as most of you know, I was very much in the center of this controversy, at least when it came out, because I had been shown these notes explicitly back in 2006. And in fact, there's many, many points of me on the record back in those days talking about this. I didn't mention the notes explicitly because I had made a promise to the person who showed them to me that I wouldn't mention that they were notes, but I talked about this. And this is in a lot of my earlier lectures and radio interviews. So I've known about it, and I'm not the only one who's known about this, by the way. Some of them famous individuals in the UFO field have also known about it, and they don't want to put their names out there. That's their choice, but I've put my name out here. So for those of you who do not know what these notes indicate, very briefly, Eric Davis met in 2002 with retired Admiral Thomas Wilson, who had back in the late 90s under President Clinton been the deputy chief of intelligence for the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And Wilson had attempted and failed after he learned about the existence of a deep black budget special access program to deal with alien technology and maybe with bodies, but certainly alien tech. He tried and was denied access and was very angry about that. And then 5 years later, he's meeting with Davis and he tells him all about it. And Davis writes up these notes, all of these 15 pages of notes, which are now fully available. They're on my website. They're pretty much anywhere. What does he say in these notes? Well, actually quite a lot, and I would encourage you to read them. But here's a couple of the items that come out in these notes. You've got billion-dollar UFO reverse engineering programs that are being managed by corporate contractors hiding behind sub-programs of other, let's say, legitimate special access programs, that is, black budget programs, and they're hiding within that. They used false descriptions in the directory that was made available to members of the Oversight Committee. That's not legal. They were hidden away under false descriptions. Furthermore, before the encounter of this contracting group with Admiral Wilson, Wilson demanded a meeting with him. He finally got one. Before this encounter with him, and this is in the notes, this group had almost been exposed previously. There had been an audit and they got found out, and they had to cut a deal with the leadership team of the senior review group of the Special Access Program Oversight Committee so that they could keep doing what they did. And they just buried this program in deeper layers of secrecy. All right. What else do we know? Well, the leadership of the Special Access Program Oversight Committee is just the tiniest handful of Pentagon officials, like 3 or 4 individuals, essentially. Also, these private contractors were able to make this senior review group in the Pentagon to do their bidding. Here's why. After Wilson comes back, he says, I'm going to complain about you guys. I should be overseeing your program. They said, be our guest. Do what you can. We don't really care. You're not in. Wilson goes back. He does complain, and he's threatened with his career. They don't praise him for saying, hey, good job in finding this irregularity. No, they don't do that. They threaten him with his career and his pension. All right. I'm bringing this up because that's the real system. That's the true reality of the UFO cover-up. In other words, the UFO reality is buried and protected within a labyrinthian structure of secrecy in the United States military system. It is for the benefit of private contractors and entities primarily at this point. And they again, I said this earlier, they make the secret, it's not classified, it's proprietary. Makes it much better to guard against freedom of information inquiries because it goes hidden from even public purview. It's nearly impervious. It is nearly impervious. I don't know if it's 100% impervious. Is it impossible for us to get in? I don't know if it's impossible, but it's a very difficult task to get to the bottom of this. So that's our reality. This never gets discussed in our polite society, which is more and more sanitized. Our reality is more and more sanitized every day. So how much truth is going to be permissible? I mean, in a world that is erasing internet freedom and physical freedoms around us every day, it seems, that requires simplistic and dumbed down messaging that is controlled by a handful of elite corporate media players who are in bed with national security and financial elites. How much truth is going to be permissible in that situation? I think the answer is quite evident. Not very much. Not very much will be permissible. So we're in an interesting situation here because we are in the midst of a globalist revolution. You know, the old-fashioned revolutions like the French Revolution, the American Revolution. There are a bunch of other revolutions most people don't remember. A lot of them actually were kind of started up from a lot of the people, or at least, if not all the people, then a large number of them. We're in a revolution today, and that's not the case. This is a revolution that is being directed by people like Klaus Schwab over in Davos. They want a genuine totalitarian system. They just call it global governance. That's all they're calling it. It's the same thing, though. All right. It is they used to call it one world government. That's out. They used to call it New World Order. That's out. It's just global governance, people. What are you getting so worked up over? We need a global system. Now, the reality is, I think if we think about this in an honest way, it is not impossible for us to see that we need some form of globalization. We do. I wouldn't be able to talk to you in this manner if there was no globalization whatsoever. Would not be possible. If you want to make an international phone call, if you want to do a Skype call, if you want to do anything with the internet, like, you need some kind of a global system in place that's going to facilitate that. All right. We can all recognize it. You want international trade? Yes, you need a global system. Not every nation is going to be economically independent. In fact, most nations are not going to be economically independent. And even if they are they could be economically independent, they would probably suffer economically in one way or another. So, look, we have to recognize, all right, that we're looking at a certain globalist necessity. But the real question is, how far is this going to go? Is it going to go so far that you erase all freedoms and you create a total system of control and turning our society into a big anthill, which is really what we are doing? A transhumanist dystopia, which is also what we're doing. A 24/7 surveillance society, which is also what we're doing. Or do we really want that? I think the answer is we don't want that. We do not want that. So that is the problem. And it's not an easy problem to resolve. All right. I think, when we're talking about political divide here, in America anyway, we tend to talk, well, Republicans versus Democrats. That's not really accurate. I mean, it often turns out that way, but that's actually not That's not the true political divide, because this goes beyond the United States. This goes into the entire industrial world. It is, however you break it down, it is almost always globalist versus anti-globalist. That's how it breaks down. That's how we need to understand this, because we are looking at a globalist revolution. And, you know, it wasn't until Trump came along. The Republican Party before Trump was totally globalist, every bit as much as the Democrat Party. No difference. You look at George W. Bush, total globalist, total. All right. So what Trump did is he kind of wrecked the Republican Party for the globalist situation, at least temporarily, so that a lot of the Republican base is now very much against the basic globalist messaging. All right. And that's caused a problem, in a sense, for the Republican Party from a globalist point of view. That could have theoretically happened to the Democratic Party. It just didn't. All right. But it did happen to the Republican Party. And so you've got this weird situation now where all opposition is being portrayed essentially as whether it's racist or sexist or this or that. But essentially, it's simply anti-globalist. And it is resisting the imposition of globalist culture, globalist economics, globalist politics, or whatever on the society. That's what it is. And so I think we would do ourselves all a big favor if we recognize that that's the dividing line. And the culture wars are simply a manifestation of what is really a globalist revolution. All right. Now back to the UFO phenomenon. I'm going to wrap this up here. Where this is going to go is really going to be potentially one of the most interesting questions of the next few years, because it is, without a doubt, the UFO phenomenon is one of the few phenomena that actually does have an ability to crack this system. There are not many subjects in the world today that can do it. There are a few, all right? It's not the only one, but UFOs is actually one subject that, because of the depth and the power of it and the implications of it and the long-lasting nature of the secrecy and the conspiracy, frankly, surrounding it, that it is one of the few subjects in this world that has the ability to do real damage to the rapid implementation of this globalist system that's coming in around us. Now, will it be able to do that? Will there be enough breathing space for the UFO conversation to be able to go into those places that it really needs to go publicly? And that's going to be the real question of the next couple of years. So we will see. I'm not here to prognosticate the future. I don't know how it's going to turn out. I think that it can go in a variety of ways. And if we are energetic, and if we believe in what we're doing, if we believe in truth, if you believe in freedom, if you believe in some kind of dignified future for the human race, then I think you want to see a true, genuine openness on the subject of UFOs, one that hopefully will snowball and become a kind of avalanche effect, because we really do need that. We need something that's going to wake up a large portion of the world to the fact that it's been lied to for decades and decades and generations and generations. And maybe, just maybe then, and only then, might we have a chance for enough people to wake up and say, holy crap, we have been lied to in such a dramatic way. We need to do some house cleaning here. And can that happen? I would say, it can happen. Whether or not it will happen is a whole other question. All right. Because unfortunately, we've developed a global culture now in which you have half the people really wanting to kill the other half, and they just hate each other. And you get a situation where people are just not listening to each other anymore. And, the COVID lockdown has made it worse. And it is, radically exacerbated an already bad culture divide. And so I don't know if we're really in a position where we're going to be able to listen to each other, but we really need to, because we got to realize, all right, whether you think you're on the right or you think you're on the left, I'm going to tell you right now, most of the people on the other side are not your enemy. All right. Maybe there's a few people at the very, very top of this pyramid. They are. But most ordinary people that you just disagree with over Christmas dinner or Thanksgiving, they're not your enemy. They just have a different opinion. Big deal. We used to have differences of opinions in the past and no one really cared. And what has happened is we are absolutely being corralled into this, what was it, 1984, 2 minutes hate, or 3 minutes hate, where you're supposed to hate something. You focus your hatred on something, and we're doing it. We're playing right into it, and we don't want to do that, right? We don't want to do that. Well, anyway, I think, whether or not this new ASRO organization is going to amount to anything, I will be interested in following that. I'm sure many of you will as well. We will see what happens. And in the larger picture, UFO folks, people who are interested in this subject, we need to keep stirring things up, because we are in danger of watching this conversation slip into this insipid, meaningless space where it is often going. And so that we're really not looking at the deep implications of the UFO phenomenon. The conspiracy, there's a real conspiracy here. Don't be afraid of the word. Don't be afraid of being labeled a conspiracy theorist. Keep in mind, that was a phrase almost certainly promoted by the CIA back in 1967 in a memo. Did they originate the phrase, or did they just use it and promote it? Well, either way, but they are. So what you have is media collaboration, where, the use of the phrase conspiracy theory literally does play into their hands, which sounds like a conspiracy theory, but it's true. It is true. Hey, I want to thank everyone for being here with me. I see some amazing